What's up, Matt Nowstalgia? Dave here with a review of Christopher Nolan's 13th feature film, The Odyssey, a massive blockbuster success thus far, a film that has developed so much hype and anticipation in the lead up to its release, and we are seeing with tremendous effect beyond what anyone would have expected just how popular and successful this movie will be. We have a lot to talk about with this movie. I'm going to get into what I like about it. Spoiler alert, I love the movie. I think it's a masterpiece. We'll talk about the movie itself, how we got here, what this says about Nolan today, how it fits into Nolan's greater filmography, the film's box office, the film's awards chances, the incredibly stacked A-list stellar cast within this movie and what it says about them and all those various performances, the filmmaking innovation within the movie. There's a lot to get to with this. And we got to really set the scene here before we dive into the movie itself because there's just so much going on with it. So, of course, The Odyssey marks Nolan's 13th film, 3 years since his last film, Oppenheimer, came out, which, of course, was also a massive success, bigger than anyone would have ever imagined, grossing $975 million, becoming at the time the highest grossing biopic film ever. That has since been passed by the Michael film this year, but a truly astounding performance from an historical biopic film. Oppenheimer, not a film as gigantically cinematic as an Interstellar or as genre conceptual as a Tenet. To see it perform the way it did, of course, leading to a massive Oscar sweep, Nolan finally winning Best Director, of course, the film winning Best Picture. Nolan has really established himself without any doubt at this point as the mayor of Hollywood, the leader of the creative community within Hollywood, right? He is literally the president of the Directors Guild, which also makes plenty of sense. But at this point, his movies in and of themselves engender their own IP. Christopher Nolan at the movies is its own franchise at this point. We can say that about very few other directors, and we can say that about no other directors at this scale, at this scope that Nolan is currently operating in. And of course, post Oppenheimer, there was so much talk and chatter and speculation about what movie Nolan would make next after the unparalleled success of Oppenheimer. And it's funny to reflect on that speculation now because really no one had the Odyssey until that became official. And the Odyssey in and of itself, the original IP, but not something that's been formally adapted to completion the way Nolan was setting out to do. So in a sense, of course, a perfect match. And then quite quickly, we also learned about Nolan's grand ambitions in making this movie, setting out for the first time to shoot an entire film with IMAX 70mm cameras. There's been a lot of great video and scholarship about all the innovation that had to go in to pull off something like that. And of course, this is a movie that shot extensively on location in 5 different countries over about 6 months, in addition to its, studio work and its water tank work. So to have the audacity to use only IMAX cameras, a crazy thing to even set out to do. But of course, a lot of the talk more recently in the lead up to the film has been the new techniques that had to be developed to pull off something like that, and not so much for the big outdoor wide sequences that IMAX has always been used for, but specifically the close-ups, the character-to-character type work where a massive IMAX, with its shielding to mute its sound, the ability to match actor eye lines with such a massive camera close up in between actor and actor was a big challenge, and they developed with Nolan and Hoytum, of course, the cinematographer for the film, developing this mirror system to not take the actors out of the moment with these massive rigs occupying the space with all the actors. Truly quite the accomplishment, because when you watch the movie, the intimacy of those close-up scenes and those really intimate indoors type scenes, you don't feel anything off at all. And it really just speaks to, I think, the craftsmanship up and down the aisle and when it comes to making this movie and pulling it off. Of course, because this movie was shot entirely on film, entirely on IMAX, it actually had to be edited down under 3 hours due to the limitations of those projectors. And now we're seeing this massive fanfare with the movie where there's such an appetite and a hype around seeing the movie in the format most intended by Christopher Nolan, which of course would be IMAX 70mm, which is only available in 20 odd locations in the entire country, more or less. Further from there, IMAX locations, particularly the best of the best IMAX locations with the dual and single laser throughout the country, are seeing massive box office share, over 50% of the movie's performance. You're seeing sold out shows continuing, and I mean the true scope of the 70 millimeter hype is wild to see. If you look at AMC Lincoln Square in New York City, that movie is sold out in IMAX 70, give or take a stray handicap seat, until August 13th. And that's just because there's no showtimes posted beyond that yet. And we're talking showtimes starting at 2 a.m. and at like 7 a.m. and things like that. It's truly wild. I'm looking forward to see the movie again. I was not able to see it in IMAX 70. I did try to get tickets to Lincoln Square, but of course AMC and other ticketing websites crashed the afternoon that tickets went on sale, again speaking to that hype. But I was able to see the movie at Regal New Rock in New Rochelle, the second biggest screen in New York, and it was truly a amazing experience with just how massive that screen is, one of the biggest in the nation. And of course there's plenty of hype around the movie because the cast is just incredibly stacked. There's actually a funny story we've been hearing about Robert Pattinson being the only person to tell Nolan that he wanted to read the script before signing on for the movie. Apparently everyone else was an immediate yes when they were approached by Nolan to enter the film. But of course the film stars Matt Damon alongside Anne Hathaway, Tom Holland, Robert Pattinson, Charlize Theron, Himesh Patel, Zendaya, Lupita Nyong'o, John Leguizamo, Logan Marshall Green, Mia Goth, John Bernthal, Elliot Page, Bill Irwin, and Benny Safdie. And of course, there's some other familiar faces as well, down the cast as well. Just an incredible collection of talent, both in big roles and small roles. And of course, that proceeds to the crew of this movie, which is an all-star cast largely reassembled from the Oppenheimer crew that Nolan had. Hoyte van Hoytema as the cinematographer, Jennifer Lame as the editor, Ludwig Göransson as the scorer of the movie. And it's really an impressive full circle moment because, of course, Christopher Nolan was originally attached to direct Troy in 2004, which of course went to Wolfgang Peterson. Nolan instead went off to make Batman Begins for Warner Brothers instead, a truly closing doors moment for the future of Hollywood in retrospect. And now Nolan has completed the loop versus, instead of adapting the Iliad, which was of course done in Troy, he's now adapted the Odyssey instead. Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is a truly epic masterpiece of a film, one of the single best theatrical experiences I've ever had at the cinema. The scope, the scale, the execution of this movie are truly unparalleled. The wild decision to shoot the entire movie on IMAX cameras bears incredible fruit because they're able to pull this movie off, shooting on location across the globe with these amazing visuals. This movie looks as good as anything possibly could. Not enough can be said about Christopher Nolan and this uncompromising vision that he has put on the screen. But this movie's success goes well beyond successfully and expertly adapting the Odyssey to the big screen. This film is incredibly thematically rich with so many touchstones to our current time, with one of the most sweeping and moving conclusions we've ever seen in a Nolan movie. The way the movie tells its story with this modern sensibility really impressed me, and the film is able to fly by despite being 3 hours in length. The movie's framing as a series of storytelling flashbacks is also incredibly brilliant. The way the movie goes back and forth throughout time and leads us into the story and tells us more, expertly done. The Trojan War material, particularly the first section we see, and then how it comes back to incredible effect in the movie's conclusion, incredibly choice. The cast is stacked, as everyone knows, when everyone's really bringing it. Matt Damon, Anne Hathaway, Robert Pattinson, A-class stuff from all of them. I want to shout out Elliot Page, though, whose work as Sinan really steals the show. It's really hard not to expect Nolan to climb back to the top of Mount Olympus once again and run it back at the Oscars with Best Picture and Best Director. The movie is that much of an achievement, and I'm so happy that the film is finding massive success because no one's doing it like this. To see the movie open to 124 million domestic, 264 plus worldwide, just incredible performance. I mean, no one, I think, really could have expected it to perform as well as it's done. I mean, think about how much higher this is against Oppenheimer, which of course blew the doors off, alongside Barbie, buoyed by Barbenheimer and all those things. To have this movie opening really just behind his later Batman films in terms of the domestic performance, and very close to his Batman films in terms of the worldwide performance, is pretty mind-blowing, honestly. And again, at this point, like, there's so much to talk about. What can Nolan possibly do next? Because I just don't know how he can top this in terms of its scope and size and execution. We can talk about more of that at the end. But yeah, I really love the movie. I love the way it starts. I think the opening to the film is a pretty impressive, exposition dump. I don't want to like be as crass to call it an exposition dump, because I thought it was done pretty expertly. But we get a lot of Penelope and Telemachus, of course, Anne Hathaway and Tom Holland at Ithaca, Odysseus's home, his kingdom. And of course, Odysseus has been gone for 20 some odd years or so since leaving for the Trojan War. And there's this immediate tension established that Penelope is effectively running out of time, and that she needs to choose a successor to Odysseus for the crown of Ithaca, and she needs to pick someone else to effectively become the king. Meanwhile, of course, Telemachus, their young son, who was just a baby when Odysseus went off to war, is now a young man, of course, played, I think, quite well by Tom Holland. I'll say this is one of the better dramatic performances from Tom Holland. Is he the best actor in the movie compared to the true heavyweights he's going against? No, but I did like how Holland was. Hathaway, it's a supporting performance, so she doesn't have a ton of material, but the material she does have, I think, is great. The way Anne Hathaway is able to, of course, inject a certain amount of emotion and passion into her line readings really comes out in this version of Penelope she's portraying. But I think the scene setting of, Ithaca today and all these suitors that are trying to woo Penelope, and as a result, they have to Penelope has to honor Zeus's law. Whenever visitors come to your home, you provide them a meal, you provide them shelter. So they're having these series of banquets where these increasingly rowdy and raucous suitors are attempting to woo Penelope, but are really just eating all her food and draining all her supplies in her banquet hall. And the concept of all the staging of Ithaca is tremendous. I believe the exterior was in Sicily, somewhere in Italy, I believe. It wasn't in Greece. I believe it was in Italy. Looks tremendous. The exterior of this, shooting as much as they do outside in real locations and using real like ancient buildings and castles and armaments. It just looks so incredible. But the interior also, great stuff there. We see, of course, Robert Pattinson, who plays Antinous, who's kind of I won't call him the leader of the suitors, but kind of the most prominent of them. And he has some allies, such as one of the other suitors played by Corey Hawkins. And elsewhere in the castle, we meet Mia Goth, who plays one of Penelope's aides or her servants, and John Leguizamo's character, who plays the elder seer, who's more or less blind at this point, Eumaeus, who's someone who knew Odysseus quite well before he left. And there's some great stuff there. I really like the material, and I like how that through line goes throughout the entire runtime, because I think Robert Pattinson, this is the coldest take imaginable, but he's just such a beast. Like, he's just so awesome all the time. He's having an amazing year. Once again, Primetime and Dune Part 3 are coming up. We already got the drama from him. Dude's a legend. I don't care that the Batman Part 2 is further delayed, because I don't need him to make the Batman. He just makes amazing choice after amazing choice. And his performance as Antinous, I really like, because he's so good at playing weaselly people, right? But also he can be a charmer, because he's still a handsome and charismatic man. So, and, in real life and in the roles he plays. So love all that stuff. But, of course, we get introduced to Odysseus, who, of course, is the framing device for him, and a lot of the storytelling we learn from Odysseus, which is, frankly, most of the framing is from Odysseus. There are some other characters who tell some stories and give us some other flashback, but Odysseus has washed up on the Isle and is treating with Calypso, the nymph, played by Charlize Theron. And he's slowly learning getting his memory, and it's just a great framing to take this story and put into a movie, so you can accurately, believably withhold from the audience and let more story out as the movie progresses. That also works quite well. And I mean, I was really blown away from the first Trojan War sequence, which of course was shown in IMAX before Avatar Fire and Ash last December. That was kind of the first sequence anyone saw of this movie. And seeing the assault and the sacking of Troy, the beginning of particularly the Trojan horse sequence, and just the way that is staged in this movie, especially when you compare it to Troy 2004, kind of night and day. You know, the so great about this movie is how tactile and real so much of it feels, because it's all grounded in humanity. You know, this is not a movie that's portraying Poseidon and Zeus and the other gods. There's one key god figure who we'll get to, but this is a movie told from the memory of the humans and the experiences of the humans, despite, of course, living in a time of apparent magic, as the title card tells us in the beginning of the film. You know, seeing that Trojan horse partially submerged in the beach outside Troy, a stark visual, but also a lot much more realistic, right? And we see young Sinon, Elliot Page's character, kind of left behind by the Greek army, Agamemnon's army, play deceive as a deserter, and Sinon gets killed by the Trojans when they discover the horse, which is a sacrifice Odysseus was willing to make. But, you know, we see Odysseus and we see Menelaus, Agamemnon's brother, played by John Bernthal in this movie, inside the horse with all their other men, and they're on top of each other, and we're hearing about how they were shitting and pissing on each other. Some of them are drowning. Visual callback to Dunkirk right there. It feels much more real the way it's perceived, and the effort it takes from the Trojans to drag this immaculate wooden horse sculpture into the city across the logs, and the men struggling to keep themselves alive and not getting crushed by their fellow man as they're being moved around the horse, but also keeping quiet and not letting any of them give up the ghost and get them exposed and, of course, all killed. At one point, the Trojans are stabbing the horse with their swords, kind of testing it, making sure there's no trickery afoot. And at one point, someone does get stabbed, and another Greek, I believe it was Odysseus or Menelaus himself, kind of grabs like a shirt or something and brushes the blood off the blade before it's pulled out, and the Trojans discover the deception. I mean, that sequence, and then watching them, of course, open up the horse, attack the Trojan guards, and fight to open the gates. It's a bit of a spy movie and action thriller for those sequences. You know, I just rewatched Troy 2004, which we don't have to really get into here. A movie that does have its merits, but very different from this movie. The, you know, opening up of the gates, that's like a 2-minute sequence in Troy 2004. It's very different. And here it's a true struggle, even though we know they succeed. And of course, you know, before we know it, we're into Odysseus kind of recounting his journey home, choosing not to follow Agamemnon's route back and deciding to go on his own journey with his men, a group of 3 ships, you know, a smaller fleet than I believe is on the text. Understandable for the movie's sake, but going off with his small fleet, gonna just kind of island hop and find their way home. You know, Poseidon lead them on. Odysseus, accompanied by his second in command, Eurylochus, played by Himesh Patel. Himesh Patel, his second Nolan role, following a supporting role in Tenet. Patel's great in this movie. He does a great job as the foil to Odysseus through this whole sequence, the audience avatar in a certain respect, because the movie does a good job of showcasing Odysseus's flaws, and that comes about over time in the way it's drawn and the way you're supposed to think about Odysseus as a character, who's played by, of course, Matt Damon, someone who almost always is playing someone overtly likable and someone you want to root for. Nolan has previously flipped it on its head to amazing effect in Interstellar, where he plays a chief villain of the movie. This case, though, Odysseus is someone who comes to recognize and recount his own flaws over time as the movie progresses. But, you know, of course, we get the various sequences in the movie, the key trials and tribulations of the journey home, the titular Odyssey. First among those, of course, is the Cyclops, Polyphemus, the Cyclops, who they encounter by chance when attempting to hunt some of his flock of sheep for food, because his men, of course, need supplies to continue the journey. And they get trapped in the Cyclops' cave. This is, I think, one of the most widely recognizable aspects of Homer's Odyssey in terms of that storytelling. It's one of the most adapted aspects of this story as well. And yeah, I think this also looked amazing. You have this puppet work portraying the massive Cyclops, and you also have this performance from Bill Irwin as the Cyclops, of course, with his, kind of mangled face, of course, the singular eye and all that. Visually, it looks so spectacular. Nothing feels out of place. It does not feel like overtly fake. Of course, there are visual effects present, but it's just a movie sequence that I thought was really thrilling and really well done. And one of our first aspects of Odysseus showing one of his flaws, where he pokes the bear. He shoots another arrow at the Cyclops once they've already escaped, antagonizing it and leading to the death of more of his men than had already been killed by the Cyclops. But that whole sequence is tremendous and excellent. Before you know it, we get the next folly, the next landing that goes poorly, where we see the Lastrygonians, who are reimagined for this movie as these tall, gargantuan, armored men. Right? They're they're not cannibals. They're not these kind of gargoyle-esque creatures destroying their ships from above. They're these hulking, like 12-footers swinging swords, and they just menacingly bear down on Odysseus's men, resulting in numerous deaths and the loss of the two of Odysseus's supporting ships. Only one ship is able to escape. Really harrowing sequence. I love the way that was staged. Again, that's also a sequence that has some of the most effects in the entire movie. But the way that plays with the perspective and the way the trees kind of move and trap Odysseus's soldiers, harrowing stuff. The introduction of them too, where they encounter a normal sized person but realize it's a child, of course, because these Lastrygonians are so tall. Great stuff there. Another amazing sequence. Of course, that leads us to another famed aspect of the tale, when we encounter Circe, the witch, who transforms Odysseus's crew into pigs. And Odysseus is able to persuade her and talk to her and convince her to eventually turn his men back into men so they can leave. Now, this movie dispenses with, I think, some of the traditional aspects of this story, where Odysseus doesn't shack up with Circe and have like a sordid love affair for a few years while his men are chilling as pigs. That doesn't happen in this movie. And just like the movie doesn't really portray him having like an intimate relationship with Calypso, it's really just subtext in this movie. And I think that kind of makes sense, because the movie is really centering on Odysseus's quest and need to get back to Penelope, get back to Ithaca, and on the other side, of course, Penelope's need for Odysseus to return. So they don't undercut it with Odysseus, letting his thing in the interim as he's making this years-long Odyssey home. I get the choice. Samantha Morton as Circe, great stuff there. Frankly, one of the, you could say, less famous big roles in the movie. Of course, a noted actor, award-winning actor. She's great in the film. Excellent casting, but she doesn't have as much star power as almost everyone else with a big role in the movie. But really strong impression there. And then, of course, you get the siren sequence. And the siren sequence is probably the most celebrated of all these like key Odyssey stops in this movie. And I think for good reason, because they make a really expert choice to have Odysseus' crew put the melted wax in their ears to block out, of course, the siren song so they can escape and not hear it, for certain death is to come should they listen. And as a result, the sound design of the movie is so awesome, where sound drops out and it's muffled, and the lack of bass whenever you stick your fingers in your ears. The movie sounds like that, and we experience the lack of hearing the siren song that all of his crew has. Really cool choice to withhold that versus try and portray the song to us and have us actually hear it. And it's hard for that to live up to your imagination. I really like that decision. And then, of course, you contrast that with Odysseus, with his innumerable pride and ego and arrogance, asked to be tied to the mast of his ship with his ears unclogged. So we can hear the song, but of course unable to actually go out and meet the sirens. And the pure agony that he experiences is one of the key sequences of Matt Damon flexing his ass off in this movie. Tremendous sequence. They quickly pass Cribbis and Scylla. Cribbis, the big monster that's occupying Scylla, the whirlpool. I believe I have those two right. And again, expertly staged. I like that. They kind of withhold a lot of the monster, and they show just a little bit of it as a plucking of the men. Great stuff there. But I really like the way it works, and again, the staging, the visuals, the terror, the scope, it's all there. Of course, in between this, before the sirens, they journey to Hades. They journey to the underworld at the behest of Circe, when Circe, lets them all go. And this is also one of the absolute dynamite 10 out of 10 sequences in the movie. The underworld, Hades, is conceived by going to Iceland. That's where they filmed it, on, of course, the iconic black sand beaches. And there, of course, Odysseus and crew interact with Tiresias, the Shade, who gives the prophecy that leads Odysseus to try in vain to avoid that, right? We eventually see everything that was predicted unfolding in those subsequent trials there. But the Shade Tiresias, and then we see the other shades. We see Agamemnon, played by Benny Safdie, and we see Sinon, played by Elliot Page. And early on in the movie, Agamemnon, menacing with his decadent armor when the gates of Troy are unveiled, but has no lines. And I was like, oh, Benny, just kind of go and be there to occupy the suit, but not much of a character. Certainly not chewing on the scenery the way Brian Cox was in Troy 2004. Right? Interesting. And then I was like, Elliot Page, just a few lines before the Trojans kill him, outside the horse. You could call those stunt casting. But of course, I was just being too impatient because, of course, both of those actors get chances to flex. We learn about Agamemnon's return home, where he's killed by his wife Clemestra, the half sister, I believe, or twin sister of Helen of Troy. And he tells Odysseus to don't expect a homecoming. Don't walk in the front door once you make it home. I actually did make it home. I sailed back from Troy. Didn't go so well for me. Keep that in mind. Great sequence. Great stuff there. Because Agamemnon, of course, is positioned in the beginning of the movie when Odysseus and Penelope are coming to grips with Odysseus has to leave for a decade at least, right? You can't defy him. He has the power of all of Greece. Ithaca needs to comply. He's doing this to protect everyone else, etc. Love the way it calls back and then circles through with the rest of Agamemnon. But Elliot Page's Sinon, oh my God, what a performance, right? Where Sinon carves into Odysseus' soul and calls him out for using him and having him be a pawn in his greater scheme, and calling him out for being a trickster, right? And I think at this point, where a lot of the themes of the movie had been pretty established at this point, but man, they really start to come home in an amazing way. I love the way Sinon kind of calls him out for being a trickster, defying the gods. And this is where Odysseus' kind of turning point happens, where he realizes just how wrong they were to do what they did. And all of it was accommodated, allowed to happen due to Odysseus coming up with this scheme the way he did. Page was outstanding as Sinon in that scene. Of course, Sinon, we learn, was like a farmer's boy or something that Odysseus had recruited to his army after taking the place of none other than a nobleman's son, Antinius, of course, Robert Pattinson's character. Robert Pattinson ducked the war, didn't go. A common person, and Sinon went and instead and paid with his life. And Odysseus portrayed as this noble man in the beginning, where he kind of did a lottery system to decide who he would take in his army, because he empathized with the fathers who would be losing their sons and things like that. But man, I love the Sinon character, and I love the way that Odysseus adopted that name as his secret identity for his return to Ithaca. God, tremendous stuff there. I loved everything with the underworld sequence. Looking forward to seeing that one again. But of course, again, that leads us to, as I said, the sirens, the whirlpool, the canyon monster, and then the final sequence, which is the cattle of Helios on the island, where, of course, leading to the rest of Odysseus' men perishing and Odysseus alone washing up to Calypso, where he then is memory hold via the lotus flower to stay with Calypso for numerous years before she has a bit of pity on him and basically lets him go by letting him redevelop his memories. Man, just amazing stuff, and another great use of Nolan using time in his movie, right? This used to be a thing that had been talked about in more of a negative or mocking way, as a fault of Nolan at times, right? You think of course, a movie that's all time, all the time, in the case of Inception, or the 3-time structure in Dunkirk, Tenet, and the pushing of the limits of understanding of how that movie deals with time. Time is a big thing in a lot of Nolan movies, really all movies, right? Even back to Following. One or the other, it's present. But with this, the way it kind of pushes our various narratives, but our understanding of the character's psyche and then their knowledge, and then the way the themes envelop, I just think it's such a sophisticated framing of telling this story and letting the audience develop more with it. I really think it's one of his best screenplays, notably written by Nolan, of course, an adapted screenplay from Homer, of course. Gotta say, hats off to Charlize, who, I think in other hands, it could be much more of a thankless part to play Calypso, the way Calypso is portrayed in the Odyssey here, where there's just enough there in terms of her presence, her chemistry with Damon, the way she plays off of him, where there's so much subtext in terms of the years they spent together. But the movie has to be economical enough to not dwell on a lot of that stuff too much. But I thought her presence was felt for sure. Similarly with Lupita Nyong'o, who plays Helen of Troy, and also briefly in one scene as the sister Clemestra who kills Agamemnon. Because, of course, we get introduced to Helen of Troy alongside, of course, her husband Menelaus, played by John Bernthal, when Telemachus leaves Ithaca in the beginning of the movie and goes to Sparta to talk with, his dad's buddy, about what happened to his dad. Because, of course, they've learned that everyone else who returned from Troy, but Odysseus has it, and no one knows. And he doesn't know anything either, Menelaus. He just, is able to tell the story. That's the tee up for the Trojan horse aspect in the beginning. Bernthal, it's fun to see him really chew on the scenery and kind of play himself, Notably, this version of the Odyssey is very colloquial. It's very modern English. It's not attempting to have everyone play a British accent, which is very common in these older Swords and Sandals movies. And I actually think it really works because the movie is thematically very modern and has like a really obvious but deep and strong comment and message on today. So I like that, Lupita, one of our great actresses, is able to make a lot with just a few moments as Helen and Clemestra. Obviously, any and all controversy around her existence in the movie was complete nonsense from unserious people, and you can see that in the box office, that all of that was fake and noise online and coming from a hateful and disingenuous place. And that's all we have to say about that. But of course, as Odysseus finally makes it back to Ithaca, Calypso lets him go. He makes a raft from his old ship, giving himself over to Poseidon, kind of knowing that as long as he submits and shows that humility, he'll find his way back to Ithaca. The gods won't kill him. They'll accept his, penance there. And that's what happens. He washes up somewhere in the kingdom, somewhere on one of the islands or whatever. And he keeps his identity hidden. And, he treats with John Leguizamo's character, the old seer, and doesn't reveal his identity yet, but learns that Telemachus has gone to Sparta, is on his way back, but also Antinous and the other suitors have sent bandits to kill Telemachus to make sure he does not come back, because with him out of the way, there'll be even one less obstacle in their way of one of them shacking up with Penelope and becoming the ruler of Ithaca once and for all. And the movie starts to become a bit of a brief adventure sequence there at the end there, where Odysseus is able to save Telemachus, again, pretending to be Sinon in the beginning. But once you see him return to Ithaca, keeping his shroud on, and seeing him interact with his old dog who'd been waiting for him all this time, Holland Telemachus recognizing that this old figure is in fact his dad he's never known. Amazing stuff from Holland there. I think that's probably like the key sequence from him. Kind of harkens back to Holland playing off Robert Downey Jr. and some of the best Marvel moments he's had. Really like that stuff there. And yeah, I really like the conclusion. I thought the last 40 minutes or so in the Palace in Ithaca was riveting. And it's just really satisfying as well, where you see the trial that Penelope puts on with the stringing of the bow, which is an amazingly foreshadowed moment earlier on in the movie. The way Odysseus heeds the dead Agamemnon's advice to not waltz in the front door and play it right. That final concluding fight and how that goes, great. Pattinson, I think, instant classic, like iconic performance in these moments where when the scrap happens, he's like hiding behind the pillar, yelling to all the other suitors, "Grab the swords, the spears, the shields," but not actually fighting himself after declining to string the bow that he had seen portrayed as a young man, knowing there's no point. Pattinson playing the weasel, playing the coward, but trying to use others. Great stuff. So good there. But this is where I think the movie's themes just like really come home to roost in an amazing way, because before all the pop-off happens, Odysseus, still abstinent in this moment, goes up and treats with Penelope through like the privacy shroud thing in the center of the banquet hall, and talks about what they've done, pretending to be a veteran, pretending to be Sinan, pretending to be a veteran of the war, someone who knew Odysseus and fought with him. And that's where we get, of course, the circle back, the conclusion to the Trojan horse sequence, where we see the full sacking of Troy. And you see Odysseus with his great shame, with his true guilt, realizing that due to his own doing, his idea to create the Trojan horse, this great deception, this violation of the gods, of Zeus's law, the concept of Zeus's law and accept the golden rule and accepting people into your home, prevalent throughout the entire movie. Him understanding how deeply he violated that, and Shade Sinan helped him get here, but him understanding how consequential this was, that he's responsible for the destruction of society. All this fear of people from the sea coming to conquer them. And that's why Ithaca needs a new king, because they got to be ready. They got to be able to build up an army should anyone attack them. Damon, as Odysseus realizes, man, we were the people from the sea. We were the bad guys the whole time. Yeah, Helen got taken. Sure. She went off. Whatever. We're the bad guys. And you see the rape, the pillage, the sacking of Troy in this astounding, once again, of course, practically conceived destructive battle sequence. Harrowing, moving. I love the way this was realized, and of course the callbacks, or the connection you can make to modern society and how things are crumbling around us in terms of decency and other things. I mean, I love the connection that Nolan's made with this. Again, is it obvious in the way it tells that, makes that connection? Sure. I don't care at all. I think it's incredibly effective. Love that sequence. And, at this point, I think you see the signature visual from Zendaya in the movie, where Zendaya has been this impersonation, this personification of the god Athena, the only true god or goddess to be portrayed in the movie. Yes, we see some nymphs, some magical figures, like Calypso, like Poseidon's son, the Cyclops. We see stuff like that, but Athena's a god, and we see her kind of accompanying Odysseus in moments, coming to her and coming to him and questioning his intentions and making sure he's sure about what he's doing, things like that. And Zendaya doing a lot with little once again here, because we know, again, she's someone with a ton of presence, as we know, someone who can act a lot with just her face. But to see her in this sacking of Troy sequence, where, of course, the statue of Athena gets beheaded, and we see that transfigured onto this slave girl, Trojan woman of some kind, on her knees, about to be beheaded by Greek soldiers. But it's not just any woman about to be beheaded. It's Zendaya, portraying Athena as we've seen her in this white, robe, crying up, looking up, asking for mercy before she's about to be beheaded, just like the statue. And it brings back this whole thing to you as you watch the movie, which a lot of people have been talking about, where was this visual of Athena that we've been seeing in the white robe, was that actually how Athena was supposed to be, or was this just Athena coming to him in the visual mode, appearing as the woman who was killed, and kind of the personification of the lack of innocence and then the savagery that Odysseus was able to accommodate due to his scheme. Really moving stuff. I think the conclusion of the movie really makes you feel a lot. I think it's, again, one of not the most emotional endings he's had in any movie. So yeah, God, I love this movie so much. I can't wait to see it again. I love how much hype is around it. It's also justified. It's also cool. I love that any semblance of the Culture Road nonsense has been completely extinguished instantaneously by this movie's rapturous reception and incredible success. That's cool. Also, we know this movie's going to kick ass at the Oscars. It's actually feels like it's in the mix to break the nominations record, frankly. Every craft category under the sun, this movie's going to get nominated in. And all that's justified, right? Costume, production design, makeup and hairstyling, sound, score, Ludwig Göransson's score. Oh my God, I barely talked about it, but God, is it incredible. It's so strong. And Göransson really feels like the modern GOAT when it comes to these things. He's racking it up. This body of work that he has is incredible. Visual effects, anything, cinematography from Hoyt, obviously. The editing is so crucial to this movie. And Jennifer Lame in her recent run of movies with Nolan, you could attribute this to Nolan's level up that we've seen, Dunkirk and onward, for sure. And then acting, Matt Damon never won an acting Oscar. This could be it. This really could be it. I kind of feel bad for Tom Cruise with Digger, because it feels like that's Tom Cruise really trying to go for it, with a more adult leaning fare and not something so actiony. But man, Damon's so good in this movie. It shows a ton of range, shows so much, the physicality, the physical transformation he's done as a man in his mid-50s. He's completely shredded in this movie, right? Anne Hathaway, of course, has won before. I'm not sure if this is going to be a Best Actress or Best Supporting Actress, but I expect her as well. I think she's tremendous. And I would openly cape for Robert Pattinson. I think he's great. He might be running in for one of his other movies, like Primetime, perhaps, but he's amazing. Elliot Page feels like more of a long shot, but incredibly justified to me. Gosh, the movie rules. I think in terms of Best Director and Best Picture, Nolan's probably running against Denis Villeneuve for Dune Part 3, Christian Mungiu for Fjord. Those are the ones that immediately come to mind most quickly, following what's come out of Cannes. Obviously, it's July. It's fool's errand to be too predictive. Inarritu in the mix for Digger, previous Oscar favorite, but the breadth of nominations, at the very least, is obviously going to happen. But God, this movie rocks. Shit. You even have the GOAT popcorn bucket with the IMAX popcorn bucket, which is so cool. One I actually bought when intending to keep. Super unique. Yeah, man. Again, visual execution, efficiency of production, the scope and scale of location shooting, the execution of set pieces in particular and how incredible they look, stellar acting up and down, a sophisticated, thematically rich screenplay, really choice and intentional editing, epic score. What more could you possibly want from a movie? It's so inherently Christopher Nolan that, again, everyone's talking about what could he possibly do next, because this is Nolan personified. This is Nolan 10 out of 10. Like, this is Nolan executing Nolan. Like, he's been working his whole career to make this movie. That's what it feels like to me. I saw people throw out Metal Gear Solid. I saw people throw out Evangelion in terms of material that's well-liked, thematically rich, historically difficult to adapt. Maybe he'll be interested in one of those things. We know he's previously been approached about James Bond and has declined. Now it's with Denis Villeneuve's doing post-Doom, which is very exciting. Happy to see how that goes. I'll be curious what Nolan's interest is in IP moving forward. Of course, Oppenheimer, based on a book, based on a real person, real events. The Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, of course, the original IP, ancient IP, but not something that was ever truly done before, which is a big part of why he's done it, from what we've learned. He made the Batman movies. Prestige has real people in it. What will he do next? Will he want to do something truly original? I'm not sure. It's really hard to say. I think he earned a bit of a break. He's still in his 50s. He's still a relatively young man, so we're going to get a lot more Nolan in the future. But man, it's been really rewarding just thinking about and reading and analyzing this movie and seeing all their other reactions to it. I really think it's really special. Let me know, though, what did you think of this movie? What did you like about it? What do you think about its success? What do you want to see from it at the Oscars? What performance did you like? Any thoughts you have about the Odyssey, even if you hate it, even if you disagree with everything I said, leave a comment. Let me know what's up, because I'm going to be talking about this movie for a while. And for more movie reviews, other things will be coming out. Spider-Man soon. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time.